Welcome to BCN's new series, What's Happening Now? A collection of informational and hopefully entertaining programming, where we substantively speak to interesting and important people. And speaking of interesting people, there's no more interesting person in Beaufort County, especially right now, as we move into election season, the silly season. The silliest of seasons will be this season in all of my days of politics, maybe yours as well. And we're going to be talking to Kellie Hopkins today, who will know more about this than anyone in Beaufort County. And I'm just so glad to have you here at What's Happening Now.
And I'm glad you invited me here.
It was my pleasure. Forward
to it.
I went to see you the other day about an issue. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
And I looked at you and I said, I've got to have you on the show.
It's a very hot topic right now.
It is a hot topic. We're going to be talking about early voting, absentee voting, and all kinds of voting here in North Carolina. And we want to talk about what's going on in the nation as well, because that's a very hot topic. Kellie, North Carolina is different than the rest of the nation because every state handles its own voting. A lot of folks don't know that. They think the federal government should jump in and make sure it happens a certain way. That's not the way it works. The Department of Justice makes sure certain types of people have free access to voting. And they make sure that all voting is fair across the board through all the states. But the way it's handled is handled state by state. In fact, a lot of people don't even realize that the states elect the president. And we'll talk about a lot of that today. But first, let's talk about what's it like being head guy at the Beaufort County Board of Elections, the supervisor.
It's never boring, I'll put it that way. I've been doing it since 1998. You were actually on the ballot my first election. So it's been 22 years now I've been doing this, and we've been through a lot over the last 22 years and a lot of changes in elections. So yeah, it's this year is probably one for the books, for sure.
I was seeking my second term then, and I remember when you came before the board, even though we did not hire you, you came and spoke, and I thought, wow, she's mighty young, but she'll be quite a catch.
I was 25.
25 years old.
I was 25.
And supervisor of the Board of Elections. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
because you replaced somebody much, much older.
Yeah, yes, she retired. So I came in after her. But the wonderful thing about the way North Carolina's kind of set up is we don't work for county commissioners because it's somewhat of a conflict of interest. If you were to have to hire me, you could come back and say, if you don't, do this during an election, then we could come back and not give you a raise or whatever. But we work, or I'm appointed by a state board of elections that's a bipartisan team. Those members are, those names go to the governor that are bipartisan. Right now the governor is a Democrat. So we have 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, but it's still bipartisan. And then when McCrory was in, we had 3 Republicans to 2 Democrats. That in turn comes down to the county boards. In every county, we have a 5-member board that's set up the same way. And I work for them, but I'm appointed by the state.
We have a long history together. I was on the ballot my second term.
Yep.
And a few years later, I was off the board, but I ran again countywide for county commissioner. A special election. 2-year. I was taking the place of Carol.
Cochran.
Carol Cochran. God bless her. God bless her. But I hadn't seen her so long, I forgot that last name. But I was taking the place of hopefully Carol Cochran, should I get elected. And I was running against the Democrat Party chairman.
Atlas Henry's.
Yeah, and the Republican Party chairman wanted somebody else. And she was not in my camp. Hood always says, I'm the only person to win countywide, and I beat the Democrat Party chairman and Republican Party chairman in the same race. But we had a recount. When the election was over, I was up by about 45, 46 votes, and we had a recount, and you handled it great, properly. I mean, I kept losing votes, and provisional votes, right? Provisional ballots. They
come in late.
Some of them were not going my way, and they had their people, I had my people, and you were there just acting like Solomon. And you did a great job, and I appreciate that. We've never had an ill word.
I think And I'll be completely honest. When I applied for the position, it was one of those things where my dad called me and said, "Look, this sounds just like you. You'd only have to work 2 days out of the year."
Oh boy!
But really, elections and the department and the functions that we take care of for citizens really isn't something that the public is informed about. They don't know about the processes behind it. So in times like these, when now it's become a hot topic, a lot of times it's confusing to them because so much is different. And like you said, elections have been left to the states. It's not federalized. So what you hear on the national news about what's going on in Washington State or Colorado is totally different than it is in North Carolina. My position is very different. In Florida, directors of elections are elected. I've always scratched my head about that one, thinking, I would oversee elections where I was elected. And then other states, their elections boards fall under the state, like the Secretary of State, who could be partisan there too. So different states have it set up different ways. And one of the biggest things we're talking about right now is voting by mail. And there's so many variations of how that's used across the country.
And speaking of the so-called absentee voting in other states versus North Carolina, you and I in the past have talked about the way it's going to be done in North Carolina. I had some issues because I had great concerns about how North Carolina was going to handle it. And we both understand that the General Assembly determines how North Carolina will handle voting in each election. It could change, but they would have to change it by general statute. This is not a constitutional provision. They have the constitutional right to make those changes. But in other states, they're looking to do something called a mass mailing, Kelly. They're going to be mailing the votes out to everybody, and whether the addresses are old or new, or whether they know if these addresses are rightful or they're fake. And that's a concern to a lot of people. In North Carolina, we don't do that. Could you explain how we do it in North Carolina?
In North Carolina, and to back up a little bit with some history, there are 5 states that have been doing all mail-out ballots, or not really all mail-out. They will send ballots out to registered voters. Now, remember, when somebody gets registered, we have to have their driver's license or their social security number, and we do verify it by mail. So there's never a possibility of somebody registering their dog, because we have to have some kind of backup from Social Security or either the driver's license number that tells us they're a real person. So they mail out to registered voters. Now, they still have the option of voting in person on Election Day. Oregon was the first state to do it. They started it in 98. So we can go back to 98 when I started working the same time. Other states have followed. There's 5 right now. Oregon, Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Hawaii is doing it this year.
California's doing it now.
California had started where they were allowing counties to decide if they wanted to go to mail. But there again, they have vote centers on Election Day, but they mail out ballots that the voters have the option to return to their counties that way. This particular election, because of the COVID issue, I think it's been ordered that they're mailing them to all the counties, even the ones that had not opted into the mail-in.
And this is a mass mailing. And as you well know, to go into the rolls. And what's the word choice you use when you purge the rolls?
Well, purge is an old word. We call that list maintenance now, and we look at several different pieces of information that are given to us from different state organizations or state departments. We get deceased lists from the Department of Health and Human Services, and we kind of wash our rolls with that and make sure that any voters that have passed away, we can get them out of the active voters. We get lists for felons every month, so we match those and make sure we keep that up to date. We also do the national change of address information we get from the U.S. Postal Service every 3 months, and we take that, and anybody who's done an address change at the post office or the post office, we mail them something saying, hey, we we see that you changed your address, you may need to update your voter registration. That goes on constantly. Then also we have what's called list maintenance, that we look at a voter's activity over the last 4 years. And if they haven't voted, we mail them a card that says, look, we haven't heard from you in a while. You need to update your information or send this back to us. If they don't send it back, then they become inactive. And if they stay inactive between 2 federal elections, then they are removed from the rolls. So that catches the people that have moved out of the state and we haven't heard from them. But it does take a process and some time to get through. But voter registration is, like I said, it's a living, breathing thing that we are changing on the daily.
Is there a time period that you wait before you go and start doing the maintenance on the individuals? The time period of once they have not voted till now?
We will start it right after the presidential election. We wait for the federal elections because a lot of people only vote during presidential elections. Yes. So they may have not voted over the last 3 years, but we'll wait till the presidential election. We do off-year elections too. In January, we'll start mailing out, and it'll be a couple thousand folks that we'll mail. Is
there a red flag point, say if they haven't voted in a decade?
No, it's over 2. If they haven't voted in 2 federal elections.
2 federal elections.
So that's a 2-year span. It could be a 4-year span, but if they registered right before 18 and then 20, so they have to miss 2 federal elections, and then we send them that mailer.
On and off year, okay, got it. And then the municipal elections are in between. So got it. So it's got a 4-year period.
If we haven't heard from them in that, or they haven't voted, we mail them that card, and they have to get back with us telling us that they're still, wanting to be registered. If they don't reply to that mailing, then that's when they're made inactive. And another thing, we have electronic poll books at the polling places on election day that have all this information. So if they're inactive, the poll workers are prompted to say, look, we haven't had any contact from you in 2 years. Do you have an updated address or something like that? So, and if they go through that inactive cycle for 2 years, or 2 federal elections, then we remove them.
Early voting. Mm-hmm. Early voting in North Carolina will start when?
October 17th, I believe.
October 17th.
I may have that wrong.
I've been watching the news, and they're talking people in North Carolina will start voting in early September. Is that absentee balloting?
Yes.
The true absentee ballot. We're going to talk about absentee ballots now. Well, we're going to get very deeply into it.
Mm-hmm. There's 2 different types of absentee voting. There's in-person absentee voting and then mail absentee voting. 2 parts to mail-in ballots. We have civilian ballots, and then we have military and overseas ballots. We have to, by law, have ballots ready to go out 60 days before the election. So September 4th is when we're going to start mailing ballots to people
that have requested them.
That have requested them. That's the big difference in what we were talking earlier, and you'll see political folks talking about it now, the difference. Our ballot by mail is voter initiated. We don't send it to people that don't ask for it. So there's a very specific form that you have to fill out that's put on the state site, and the voter has to fill that out completely. We have to have that social or driver's license again, signatures. If you're requesting for your daughter, because near relatives can request for like children or their parents or whatever, we would have that information on that form. That form has to be completed properly before we're able to mail a ballot to a voter who's requested it. Then they get that ballot packet, and then there's additional information that they have to provide. They would have their ballot, and then also there's a witness requirement. If you vote by mail, you have to have somebody witness that ballot saying that they know you are the one that voted it. So if you voted your ballot here, I don't want to see how you're voting, but I would be in the room enough to say, yeah, I witnessed Stan filling out his ballot. So I would then sign the envelope that it's on, and then it comes back to us. And when you hear so many people talking about how ballots aren't counted, it seems like there's something about Delaware or New Jersey or something.
No, about New Jersey and New York.
Yeah. I need to look into it, but there are ballots that we don't count, and that is because voters don't properly fill out the form. They don't get their witness. We can't count ballots.
That doesn't even make the provisional status, does it?
No, it doesn't. So they have to complete that application on their absentee and have that witness, or we can't count it. Now, we do try to remedy that. If we got in one that we have rejected for no signature, or if they don't have a witness or something like that, then we would send a mailing to the voter and tell them, look, we can reissue the ballot, or you can go on election day or during one stop and vote again. But when I hear that states have got a percentage of voters that aren't being counted in the mail, I would think it's because the voters are not coming up to the security standards that we have on counting mail ballots.
A few months ago, when I became aware that there could be a change in North Carolina, the State Board of Elections was requesting that we had a change in our general statute just for this year. And correct me where I'm wrong, Kelly, because you explained it to me, and I still made it an initiative as a resolution, and it did go up to Raleigh, and we did get a response. But at that time, there was concern that the State Board of Election would send out these absentee ballots where there would be just either no witnesses or one witness. But now there's got to be two witnesses, right?
No.
Or just one witness? Prior
to this year, okay. I think it's been a pretty good split and a pretty good compromise between the sides, and that's really what we need more of. Prior to this year, it's been two witnesses. So there were certain organizations that were trying to eliminate the witness requirement altogether. It's saying that it was a COVID-related, problem. You didn't want to have to get people in your house or home to get exposed to it. So the legislature came back and said, okay, we'll split the middle. We'll take it down to one witness. They would not go to a point where there wasn't a witness. Yes. Now, some of the other really cool things that I think has happened with this legislation that is really going to continue past this pandemic is that we are developing a absentee request portal where people are going to be able to go and request and see their ballot. We're going to implement a program called Ballot Tracks that's going to let people know where their ballot is through the mail and whether it's counted or that. And that's always been something that voters could do. They could call us and say, did you get my ballot? Well, yeah. But somebody could call and say, I never got it. Now we're going to be able to see where it's at. And I think there's a big divide in whether or not mail-in ballots are safe or not. And I think there is a middle ground we can all meet that would make people feel safe about it, but still let people have that opportunity. And I think stuff like this Ballot Tracks that they've asked for and that state portal is adding technology to it. So I think voters will be more, happy that they can keep an eye on where their ballot is and where it's coming to. And know also, I need to add this, that all across the country, ballots just aren't thrown out. And there's not a big pile we just get together and count. When we send out absentees, they're traceable ballots. There's somewhat like a security number on it, and all of that stuff is tracked. So if after the election we find out that someone has fraudulently voted, we could, if they were properly protested, could go and retrieve that ballot. So there's a lot of safety features in it that the public just isn't really aware of.
Could I mention something for the public?
Sure.
Two things. This is not going to be online voting. It's just online tracking. Number two, should somebody vote illegally in North Carolina, it is a felony. And you could be prosecuted and sent to jail just because you really want to get that guy in office. Do you really want to take that chance, citizen? There's people out there, such as myself, would put you in jail for dishonoring one of the great rights we have in this nation, which is the right to representation by ballot.
Yeah, it's the cornerstone of democracy.
Of our republic. Yes. We are a constitutional republic. And being a constitutional republic, Our Constitution gives us specifically the right to vote, and it spells out how the voting should take place and then allocates it back to the states.
Mm-hmm.
And then the general statutes kick in. And that's why Kelly and I are kind of getting into nitty gritty right now, because that's where it goes.
And we need to.
We really do.
We do. And I think more the media, and everybody has an opinion about the media, but the media needs to be more specific, because we hear things from Virginia or South Carolina or something that's going on across the country that gets people very upset, because, I mean, it's their ballot. I completely get it. But we need to say, okay, does this really happen in North Carolina? So we really do need to get into specifics about how it happens here.
I'm going to make a statement here, Kelly,
Okay.
and you may agree with it, you may not, but I am 100% right. Most media people...
You're not going to give me a chance, Steve.
I'm going to give you a chance to respond, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you and the public I'm 100% right.
Okay.
Most media people haven't got a clue about what we're talking about. They do not understand absentee voting. They do not understand the difference between mass mailing and absentee voting. It is like, it's not even two different parts of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
It's like two different coins held in one corrupt hand and one honest hand, in my opinion.
That's the problem, the disconnect that we're having,
Yes.
is that they're given pieces of information, and I don't know that it's that sound bite that they have to get, and they have 30 seconds, so they're not able to go into it.
No, they
in
don't know.
detail.
I've seen them in these long, drawn out discussions with other people that don't know what we're talking about.
My skin has crawled watching a few.
Have you?
Yes,
Yeah.
it has,
And they
because I'm
really
like,
don't know.
that's not how it happens.
And I'm going to go one step further. Most people in the media have never read the Constitution or studied the Constitution, and they don't understand the Constitution. And the Constitution dictates how we govern, 100%, at all levels. I mean, you have a North Carolina Constitution, you have a federal Constitution. Federal Constitution is the most important.
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina Constitution is secondary, but both are important.
Absolutely.
One cannot operate independent of the other. That's just the way it works. The 10th Amendment allows some independence, but not too much.
Mm-hmm.
Just give you a case in point.
Okay.
What's happening on the streets of Portland and Seattle? A lot of people say, well, that's the state's responsibility. And Mr. Trump is saying, no, I have the responsibility to make it safe if they will not do it. Now, this could go to Supreme Court, but a lot of people interpret the 10th Amendment, which allocates the states the right to take care of their people.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're not taking care of their people, then they are violating their part within the 10th Amendment. And then the federal government has a right to step in. A civil war was fought because of that. We got to elect people here in North Carolina, in Beaufort County specifically.
Yep.
And it is all governed by the General Assembly. Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about some of the problems the General Assembly has had. And since we are now moving into a new season where the ballots will be requested, one signatory as a witness is required now, not two any longer. But it is going to be easier, the best of both worlds. So you say, hopefully that will be true. People that don't do what they're supposed to do, if they try to get their guy in, even by cheating, they could go to jail if prosecuted. Let's talk about the problem that we've had in North Carolina, like the 9th District, where an election was held. A winner was declared, and then there was discovered there was some transgressions afoot. And those transgressions were what's known as ballot harvesting. That's got to be the great fear of every election supervisor, such as yourself.
Well, I will start by explaining ballot harvesting, or what actually was going on in Congress District 9 or Congressional District 9. They had an operative that was going around with ballot request forms, absentee ballot request forms, where I said that it's a specific form. You have to have that. And he would go door to door and get all these folks to fill out requests. Then he would bring them in batches to the Board of Elections. Then they would be mailed, and it was public record who had absentee ballots. So then he would go back and visit the people that had received ballots. And there's all sorts of things that could have gone on there. I'm not quite sure what. But there was a way of manipulating how those ballots were voted and brought back in or not brought back in. The thing that we need to really grab hold of in that situation was that it was caught. And the legislature has added some things to make that not as easy to do. The County Board of Elections noticed that he was bringing in big stacks of absentee ballot requests. So now we have to track who brings those in. It is illegal in North Carolina for anybody other than the voter or the voter's near relative to bring us one of those requests.
That has changed.
That has changed. That has been.
That was going to be a question I was going to.
Yep, that was something that the legislature did in response to the issue there. They did bring some felony charges into it to give it a little bit more teeth behind it. It's now a felony for a Board of Elections member or employee to mail out ballots that weren't requested. So now, in addition to we have to track who brings those in, they also made the information that was public record for absentee ballots confidential until Election Day. So, and I'm sure you've monitored it. We would put it on our website after a day's voting who voted for that day because it's public record. Well,
you send us the press release, and I appreciate it. We put it on Vote County now, and I almost never see it. But I try to give all the information I can and share it with the public because I think the more information, the more transparent we are, the more it is great.
Faith that the citizens of Beaufort County have in our office. But in addition to that, they have also they don't let those names out. So now operatives can't see who has a ballot. So if we mail you a ballot, it's not public record until you bring it back to us. So once Election Day rolls around, those mail out ballots will become public record. And then they can then go under scrutiny of any of the parties that would like to go through them or like with McCrory Cooper election. Yep, I'm sure you remember the fine tooth comb they went through throughout the state to try and find issues with what was going on. So, and elections are not certified until 11 days later. So we have all this voting going on and then Election Day, but then we don't finalize it until not the Friday, but the following Friday after we audit. And people don't know about this, but every ballot that we have to have a name attached to. So I have to go through, get all the voter history, make sure that if we've got 10,000 ballots, I have 10,000 names. If by chance one of the poll workers didn't hit a button on a machine, then that becomes an error.
And if I might interject, you trying to be specifically correct on everything you do, which is so important, even though it is not an exact process, as we discussed. When people come in for early voting, it's pretty much absentee voting. They have to sign that they were in there. It's almost like an affidavit. They are their own witness, right?
Yes. And we witness it.
And you witness it.
But one-stop voting is in-person absentee voting. So absentee voting, that phrase applies to anything that happens prior to the election. So there's Election Day voting and anything else is absentee. And that could come in several different forms. You could do it by mail or in the in-person.
So the one-stop voting pretty much is a microcosm of absentee voting.
Correct.
The only difference is they're there voting. They have the convenience of having someone there witness, and they don't have to mail it in.
Exactly.
So all they have to do is find somebody to witness and put a stamp on it.
Yep.
And then it's in. And that saves them from having to wait in lines and drive their car there.
Yes.
So really, it's not that difficult, is it?
Voting by mail?
Yeah.
No. And let me go back to it. We talked about the legislature changing a few things this year about the witnesses. The one witness will be for this year because it's for COVID, but after 2020, we will go back to the two witnesses.
The two witnesses.
Or a notary. There's always been the option of having a notary sign your absentee ballot if you didn't have a witness, the two witness requirement. So, yep. But all of that is considered absentee balloting. And One Stop, and it's gone crazy. People love it. It's 2.5 weeks that they can come in there. And if you have an address change or anything that you needed to update, we can do it there very quickly, where on election day you could run into some issues. So I believe we had more than half of the people vote in 18 and 16 were done early.
Yes.
Yep.
If you win early voting, you usually win the election.
Yeah, it used to be that absentee was a pretty good indicator because we didn't have a whole lot of it, and it was by excuse. So you could look at it and say, okay, this is a pretty good poll of how people are going to vote. But now you can't look at the absentee votes, especially One Stop, and say, okay, this person's going to lead. You've been there on election night, and somebody who can really work One Stop and be way ahead in One Stop, and then on election day, the election day stuff comes in, and that's the only place they had votes. So it kind of can be a roller coaster on election night with the absentees and stuff, because you just don't know exactly where they're coming from. A
lot of little hearts are broken on election night.
Yes.
I'm sorry. It's kind of funny.
Well, I hate it's not funny, but
it is. I mean, it's a big boy game. You put your name, you file, you should be able to handle it, win or lose.
We have had this conversation. In order to be on a ballot, you're asking the public to say that you're better than somebody else. So there's anybody who runs for office, there's some ego involved in it, definitely.
The thing that I find so funny and so compromising is all the promises these new people make about what they're going to do if they get elected. I enjoy that. But let's go on. Let's stay on this absentee voting versus mass voting. What we do in North Carolina is so different. What they have done in New Jersey, specifically Paterson, New Jersey, which is a township in New Jersey, and also in New York, where they still do not know in two separate elections, 10 weeks later, who won. And they may never know.
And I need to address that too, where a lot of the media, again, we're going to go back to the media, talked about states rushing into this mail-in system. It would be almost impossible to implement a successful, well, I better say efficient mail-in system in this amount of time. When you look at some of the bigger county, like Sacramento County in California, they have all this equipment that sorts and takes pictures of signatures and matches signatures and does all that. The issue with a lot of states that have done this is when they count the ballots, that on election day, they don't have the absentee ballots counted because they've got so many. Here again, this is the difference in North Carolina. Our legislature or our general statutes allow us to open the ballots and insert them into a tabulator at one of 5 meetings. So we have 5 absentee meetings. They would approve them because we go through them and make sure that all of the information is there, but our bipartisan board has to actually look at every absentee ballot and then approve it. So once they're approved, we open the envelope, put the ballot in the tabulator. Now, we don't tabulate it. We just run it through it. Then we seal up the ballots for each week and store them. And then on election night, we would turn the key to get the results. So we don't have the results. But by being able to tabulate those ballots ahead of time, we won't have to open 5,000 ballots on election day. So my main goal is on election night in Beaufort County, everybody will know who pretty much won the election, other than late absentee ballots and provisionals. They're added later. Because if you do mail an absentee ballot on election day and it's postmarked by election day and we get it by that Friday, we'll count it and add it to the canvas results. But yeah, all the stuff you're hearing about how late returns are coming in, I'm thinking we're ahead of that already.
Well, I'm more confident here in North Carolina. Yeah. What they have in New York, though, they have judges that are politically appointed or win races, and they're all Democratic socialists up there. They're determining who's winning and who's not winning, and it all depends on who they like. this is a good ballot, this is a bad ballot. I don't see how a judge can make that determination.
I'm not familiar with that, which I've been so busy with what's going on here, I haven't been able to. So, but I have a hard time believing even the public would let us get away with that here. In Beaufort County especially, we have a very high turnout rate. When you look at Beaufort County's percentages for turnout, we're usually in the top 10 in North Carolina.
70% in some cases.
Yeah, the last presidential was, I think, 72 or 73%. So we turn out in Beaufort County.
Yeah, we do.
And people are more involved. I think the county commissioners races, y'all really kick it up a lot of times. And
there's people that will go specifically just to vote for a county commissioner.
I know. And I hear of stuff being said in the media and so forth. And I'm like, there's no way my public would let me get away with that. I mean, we know too much. And by and large, everybody's going to talk about fraud. And I'm not going to say that there's not cases of fraud. To be sure, there is. But I'm pretty confident a coordinated fraud would be hard to pull off.
So you're saying in Beaufort County, we really do not suffer from voter suppression at all?
No, I don't. I do think we have issues with people not being able to get to polling places. But that's why, and that is a type of suppression. So we need to look at who's turning out in different areas of the county and the
but
county commissioner.
But they could do absentee ballot.
Yes, they can do mail. But it's just like our one stop, and we're a very unique county in the fact that our county seat is at the very western part of the county, and then we're split by a river, and we have two municipalities at the end. There's Aurora and Belhaven that you have to take a 30-minute ferry to. Yes. So we have had satellite sites down there, not because of a great deal of population, but because they're so far from our office. And the board has always felt like they deserved attention too. And that always worked out for us. So we put it down there so both of them wouldn't have to come so far. And then the legislature changed it to all satellite sites had to operate all 17 days, 7:30 to 7:30. Well, we were able to work with Representative Keith Kidwell, and he was able to get us 2 exemptions for Belhaven and Aurora because of the geographic situation of Beaufort County. We couldn't do Aurora and not Belhaven, or Belhaven and not Aurora. So we worked closely with Keith on that one. And Hyde County's got an exception for Ocracoke, and we have an exception in Beaufort County for Aurora and Belhaven.
And in North Carolina, there will be no Sunday voting, right?
Not in Beaufort County.
Not in Beaufort County, but some other counties?
There are schedules. There again, states one way, but counties can do it differently too.
Counties are a body politic.
Yes.
Of the state of North Carolina, we have a lot of say what we do.
Yeah, counties decide on their absentee schedule. In Beaufort County, we do not have Sunday voting at this point, but we are open on Saturdays, and our office hours are going to be 8 to 7:30. So, and we'll do a week and 2 Saturdays in Belhaven and Aurora, but we've also got Chocowinity that's going to be open, and that's a population issue in Chocowinity. They're only 6 miles from us, but if they weren't voting there, they'd come to our office, and then we'd have long lines, because you really haven't seen too many long lines in Beaufort County.
No,
we've managed that pretty well to see if we can't get people in and out.
I vote sometimes early. I more often vote on election day because it's something I'm used to, and I almost never wait.
And I'll tell you a funny story. I used to be the first one to vote absentee because I'm out of my precinct. I'm in the Belhaven precinct, so I always have to vote absentee. But I used to always vote first, and I just thought that was cool. Then one year I voted first, which was 2.5 weeks out, and it was on a county commissioner. And then the county commissioner made me mad. And I was like, oh no, this is. Did
you change your vote to me at that point? You couldn't change your vote to me?
No. Once you vote about it, I don't even know what year it was. And I can't even remember exactly who it was. But it was a county commissioner. And I thought, I can't believe I voted. So now I'm the last absentee. I don't vote until the Saturday before.
Well, if truth would be known about a lot of our county commissioners, I think a lot of our citizens would be rather mad. A lot. And that's what we do here at Beaufort County now, especially what's happening now. We're getting the word out. I don't know if you realize this, but after each meeting, we're having a show called The Meeting After the Meeting.
Mm-hmm. I did not know.
And one, Hood Richardson, is going to sit right there in that seat. And it's going to get wild and woolly, and Hood's going to tell us how he really feels.
And Hood's been in the game a long time, too.
I dare say there's any county commissioner knows as much as Hood about running a
and
county.
Hood, I think he came in, 2 years after you?
2 years after, 1996.
Yep. So you and him have been on the board, him consecutively since I started
Me taking
22
2 breaks.
years ago. And I think Jerry Langley.
Wasn't voluntary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah.
Speaking of voter suppression,
Mm-hmm.
in North Carolina, eventually we're going to have voter ID.
Yep.
It's in the Constitution.
Yep.
I mean, this is not a general statute thing. It
Nope.
is in the Constitution. It must happen, or we must take it out of the Constitution, one way or the other, or it must be ruled by the Supreme Court as wrong. And that would be with the Voting Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
They would reinterpret the Voting Rights Act. I have my feelings about it. I'm sure everybody has theirs. My feeling is always that people need to do whatever it takes to vote.
Mm-hmm.
If it takes an ID, it takes an ID. Anything we can do to eliminate any fraud. It's been a big problem in the Democratic Socialist Party that they have a problem with people having to show an ID. Yet, to go to their convention, you have to have an ID to get in. And I don't understand that hypocrisy. I think it's very important that my vote not be canceled out
Mm-hmm.
by somebody who's not who they say they are. And that has happened before. It's happened in Beaufort County.
I've known of it happen once, and I made Dumb Crook News on John Boy and Billy with it.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Did you really?
The fella, yeah.
What happened once in my election? Once
maybe
I ran.
it must have been, well, you've been running for 22 years.
Yeah, it might have been.
The one time I know the fella's dad had recently passed away, like within a week. And so we wouldn't have caught it that soon. And he voted, and then he went to Ward 2 and decided to vote for his dad. And when we talked to him, he said, well, I knew how he was going to vote. But what he did was he left his I voted sticker on his shirt from the time he voted before. So our chief judge picked up on that, and yeah, that didn't happen. But, and he was charged.
Well, the time it happened in my election, the guy was not voting for me, so I'm glad they caught him.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that takes some gumption to walk in front of a group of bipartisan poll workers that are, again, here's another safety thing. The parties, both the Republican and the Beaufort County Democratic Party, give us the names of the poll workers. We don't hire poll workers. They're given to us by the parties. So that's another safety step into where I wouldn't have control over everybody under me. So there's so many little armors throughout the process that helps. But it takes a lot of a nerve to go in and say you're somebody that you're not. I think what people need to be more worried about is just general human error.
Yes.
And that does happen. We have had new elections in Beaufort County. We did that in 2003 when we had a school board election go bad because of precinct officials passed out the wrong ballot all day. So that's my job, and that's the Board of Elections' job. We're not here to have a perfect election. There isn't such a thing, but it's my job to make sure I work for the voters. I need to look through it and say, okay, and we've had big elections where our error would be 7 votes. And you've sat through them. You've seen recounts where we show the ballots. We've been extremely transparent in how we treat it. And my job is to make sure that y'all are heard. And if you're not, then we need to have a new election or try to remedy it in some way. Usually, elections are not so tight that the error margin would affect the overall outcome. And that's that's my job, is to find out if the error is greater than the margin of victory. And if it is, then we need to get down to it. But we're not scared of challenges. We're not scared of people coming forth and telling us there's a felon voting or dead. We want people to do that because that's our job to make sure that. And I'm working for the county because y'all are spending money on it and we need to do it right. So I try to. I mean, that's always been my kind of the way I handled it. And I think the more you know, the better you are. And transparency. And my board has always been very transparent. We had a tie in a municipal election this last November. And I mean, both candidates walked out of there feeling like it was done correctly. So that says a lot. We ended up doing names in a basket. I printed out on an Excel spreadsheet 5 of each, and we rolled them up exactly the same, put them in a basket, and Watsy Sutton, our board member, shook it, and Tom Payne pulled one. And that's how. So don't ever let anybody tell you that one vote doesn't mean anything, because it does. It does.
In municipal elections in Beaufort County, there's not big turnouts.
No.
Very small turnouts. Whereas county commissioner turnouts are generally anywhere from about 60 to 75%, depending on what year it is. It's just a fraction in municipal elections. And I'd like to say this. There's a statement that's always been said when I was, colloquial such statement that was said years ago when I first got into politics. And I think it was something like, who controls the ballot box controls the election, which means fraud is rampant and fraud makes a difference. I'm here to tell you right now, that does not happen in Beaufort County. With Kellie in the driver's seat as supervisor, we have clean, bipartisan, and fair elections. And I'm so happy you're here to manage this for us.
I appreciate you saying that. I really do.
And will you come back and speak to us again?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're just getting started.
And
here.
This makes voters feel better, and your constituents that are going to be voting for you. I mean, I hate to see anybody worried about whether their vote was counted or not.
Yes.
And we're very open.
Or canceled out.
Yeah, or canceled out, or any process that is confusing. I'd be more than willing to come on here, or if anybody wants to call the office, we'd be more than happy to help them.
Well, if people are confused after this and many future happening conversations with Kellie, it'll be their own fault.
We could do mini series. We could get into redistricting. There's just a whole ton of stuff that we could get into.
Well, these issues will be prevalent in the news. And when they become prevalent and folks are aware of them, it hits that mass. I'll have you back.
I would love to come.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And we look forward to having you again next week when we're going to have another interesting guest. Thank you very much.